Ayana had always lived a life deeply connected to the land, a life that was peaceful yet full of purpose. She was part of the Apache tribe, a group of people who respected the earth and all its creatures. From a young age, Ayana learned from her grandmother, a wise and respected healer in their community. Her grandmother taught her about the plants, herbs, and spiritual practices that could heal the body and soothe the spirit. Ayana was known for her calm nature and deep knowledge of healing. Though she lived in a small village with her tribe, Ayana preferred solitude. She often ventured into the forest, far away from the rest of the tribe, where she could focus on her healing and connect with nature. It was in these quiet moments that she felt truly at peace, listening to the rustle of the wind through the trees and the songs of the birds. She believed that everything in nature was interconnected, and she had spent years learning to live in harmony with the world around her. One day, as Ayana was walking through the forest to gather herbs, she stumbled upon something unexpected. A man was lying unconscious on the ground, his clothes torn and stained with blood. His face was pale and he looked as though he had been badly hurt. At first, Ayana hesitated. She didn't often deal with outsiders. Most people from outside her tribe were strangers, and the few who came to her village were usually just passing through. But as she knelt beside him, she saw that he was in serious trouble. His breathing was shallow and his injuries seemed critical. He had been attacked by something, perhaps a wild animal, and left for dead in the wilderness. Ayana's heart softened, and without thinking twice, she carefully lifted him into her arms and began the long walk back to her camp. She had no idea who this man was or where he came from, but she couldn't leave him there to die. She knew she had to help him. When Ayana reached her camp, she carefully laid him on the soft ground beside her fire. She set to work quickly, doing everything she could to stop the bleeding and stabilize his condition. Her hands moved with practiced ease, applying pressure to his wounds, using herbal poultices to prevent infection, and feeding him bitter teas to ease his fever. For days, Ayana stayed by his side, watching over him as he lay in a deep, feverish sleep. She made sure he drank the healing tea, applied new bandages when needed, and never left him alone. The days felt long, but Ayana was used to patience. Healing was not something that could be rushed. She understood that the body needed time to recover, just as the soul needed time to heal. As the days passed, she began to notice subtle changes in the man's condition. His breathing became steadier and his fever began to lower, but it wasn't just his body that was healing. Ayana noticed something in his face, a gentleness that started to emerge as he grew stronger. He still hadn't opened his eyes when Ayana spoke to him. She didn't expect him to hear her, but she often found herself talking to him as she worked. Sometimes she spoke of the world around her, explaining the plants and the animals she loved so much. Other times, she simply told him about the peaceful life she had known. She didn't know why, but she felt a strange connection to this man, despite his being a stranger. One evening, after several weeks of careful tending, Ayana noticed that the man's fever had finally broken. She sat beside him, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The man stirred, his eyelids fluttering. Slowly, his eyes opened, blinking in the dim light. At first, he was disoriented, unsure of where he was or what had happened. But then his gaze met Ayana's and a look of recognition filled his eyes. "Where am I?" he asked in a weak voice, his throat dry. "You are safe," Ayana said softly. "You were badly hurt. I found you in the woods and brought you here to heal." He tried to sit up, but pain quickly shot through his body, and he groaned in discomfort. Ayana placed a gentle hand on his shoulder to keep him steady. "You must rest," she advised. "You are still healing." The man looked at her with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "I was lost and you saved me." Ayana simply nodded. She didn't need thanks. Helping others was just part of her life. But there was something in the man's eyes that made her pause. He wasn't just expressing gratitude. There was a deeper emotion there, something she couldn't quite place. She had seen many people, both from her tribe and from outside it, come and go. But there was something different about this man. Over the next few days, the man whose name she learned was Lucas continued to recover. He became more alert and the fog of his fever lifted. As he regained his strength, he asked Ayana questions about her life. He wanted to know where she came from, what she did, and how she had come to be in the wilderness alone. Ayana answered as briefly as she could. She wasn't used to talking about herself, especially to someone she barely knew. But as the days went on, Their conversations grew longer, and Ayana found herself sharing more than she had intended. She spoke of her tribe, her grandmother, and the lessons she had learned. Lucas listened intently, never interrupting, and it became clear that he respected her more than anyone she had ever met. Lucas, for his part, shared his own story. He had been part of a cattle drive, traveling across the land with other cowboys. During their journey, he had been attacked by a wild animal while scouting ahead. His companions had not noticed his absence until it was too late, and by then, he was far from help. It had taken him hours to drag himself through the rough terrain, but he had eventually collapsed in the woods just as Ayana had found him. "Why did you help me?" Lucas asked one evening, his voice filled with curiosity. "Most people would have left me to die." Ayana glanced away, feeling uneasy. "I couldn't leave you," she said simply. "It's my duty to help those in need." Lucas nodded, but he didn't seem entirely convinced. He sensed that there was more to her story, something she wasn't sharing. But he didn't press her. Instead, he focused on his own healing. He was deeply grateful for Ayana's care, and he couldn't understand why she would go to such lengths for someone she didn't know. As the days passed, Lucas grew stronger, and his connection to Ayana deepened. He found himself wanting to do something to repay her for the kindness she had shown him. He began to help her with the daily tasks around her camp, gathering firewood, hunting, and making sure her supplies were always stocked. He was determined to show her that he didn't take her generosity for granted. He knew that words alone could never express how grateful he was for what she had done for him. But as he spent more time with her, he realized that his feelings for Ayana were becoming more complicated than simple gratitude. There was something about her calm strength, her quiet wisdom, that he found deeply compelling. He admired her independence, her knowledge of the world, and the way she moved through life with such purpose. And as they spent more time together, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something more between them. For Ayana, her feelings were much harder to understand. She had always been content with her solitary life. She never imagined she would be drawn to a man like Lucas, someone from a world so different from her own. But she couldn't deny that there was a connection between them, something that went beyond healing and gratitude. She tried to push the feeling away, but it lingered in the back of her mind. And so, in the quiet stillness of the wilderness, their relationship grew. It was a bond that neither of them had expected, yet one that seemed destined to change their lives forever. Neither Ayana nor Lucas knew it yet, but the path ahead would be one of discovery, healing, and a love that neither of them had ever imagined. As the weeks passed, Lucas's recovery continued, and with each day, Ayana noticed changes in him. He was no longer the weak, injured man she had found in the woods. His strength had returned, and his spirit was as determined as ever. But there was something more that had developed between them, a quiet understanding, an unspoken bond that neither of them had anticipated. Lucas was grateful for Ayana's care, and he felt deeply indebted to her. His time in the wilderness, recovering under her care, had given him a new perspective on life. He had been a cowboy all his life, used to moving from one place to another, living a life of constant motion. But with Ayana, he had found something different, a sense of peace and purpose that he had never known before. He knew he could never repay her for saving his life, but he wanted to try. Ayana, on the other hand, wasn't used to depending on anyone. Her entire life had been about helping others, but she had always done so from a distance. She had never allowed herself to become too attached to anyone, knowing that the world she lived in was one of constant change. But there was something about Lucas that made her feel vulnerable. He wasn't like the others who had come to her for healing. He was different. He was quiet, strong, and respectful, and though she tried to keep her emotions in check, she couldn't ignore the feelings that were slowly growing inside her. Lucas began helping Ayana with her daily tasks around the camp. At first, she had resisted, not wanting to let anyone take over the things she had always done herself. But as the days went by, she began to appreciate his help. He was kind and gentle in the way he did things, and he never complained. Whether it was gathering firewood, cleaning the camp, or hunting for food, Lucas was always there, offering his assistance without hesitation. The more time they spent together, the more Ayana found herself opening up to him. She shared stories of her childhood, of growing up in the tribe, and the lessons she had learned from her grandmother. She told him about the land, about the animals and the plants that she knew so well. She told him about the spiritual practices of her people, the rituals that connected them to the earth and the sky. And to her surprise, Lucas listened with genuine interest. He didn't question her beliefs or make her feel strange for the way she lived. Instead, he respected her deeply and seemed to understand that her way of life was sacred to her. For his part, Lucas found himself drawn to Ayanna more than he had ever been drawn to anyone before. There was a quiet strength about her that he admired. She wasn't like the women he had known in his past, women who were loud and boisterous, trying to grab attention. Ayanna was different. She was calm, serene, and in tune with the world around her. She had a wisdom that seemed to come from the earth itself, and he couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for her. It wasn't long before Lucas realized that his feelings for Ayanna had grown beyond simple gratitude. He cared for her deeply, more than he had ever cared for anyone before. He had spent so much of his life on the move, never staying in one place long enough to form deep connections with others. But with Ayanna, everything was different. He couldn't deny the way his heart fluttered whenever she was near, or the way his thoughts often drifted to her when they were apart. He knew he had to tell her how he felt, but he was unsure of how she would respond. He didn't want to scare her away or make her uncomfortable. One evening, as the sun began to set and the air grew cooler, Lucas and Ayanna sat by the fire, their feet stretched out before them. The fire crackled in the silence, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It was a peaceful moment, but for Lucas it was also a moment of decision. He had to tell Ayanna how he felt, even if it meant risking their friendship. "Ayanna," Lucas said, his voice quiet but steady. She turned to look at him, her expression calm but curious. "I don't know how to put this, but I need you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. You saved my life, and I'll never be able to repay you for that. But it's more than just that." Ayanna's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't interrupt him. She could tell that he was struggling to find the right words, but she didn't want to pressure him. She simply waited, her gaze soft and understanding. I don't just feel grateful for you, Ayanna," Lucas continued. "I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. I think I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Ayanna was silent. Her mind raced, but her heart felt strangely still. She hadn't expected him to say this, though in some way she had sensed it. She had felt it too. The connection between them had grown beyond the simple healing she had given him. It had grown into something deeper, something she couldn't ignore. But she wasn't sure how to respond. She had always kept her emotions guarded, always kept herself at a distance. What if this love was just a fleeting moment? Something that would pass once the excitement of the situation wore off. She took a deep breath, her voice soft but steady. "Lucas, I didn't expect this," she admitted. "I've always kept my heart closed, afraid of losing it. But I can't deny that I feel something for you too. It's hard for me to open up." Lucas's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "I understand," he said gently. "You don't have to open up right away. I'll wait. I just wanted you to know how I feel. You don't have to feel the same, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore." Ayanna looked at him, her heart full of emotions she hadn't known how to name. She had spent so much of her life focusing on her healing and her connection to the land that she hadn't allowed herself to feel love. But now, in this quiet moment by the fire, she realized that love was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. "I care for you too, Lucas," she said softly, her voice full of sincerity. "And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for us." The silence that followed was not awkward but peaceful. It was as though the world around them had stopped moving for just a moment, allowing them to truly feel the depth of their connection. It wasn't the beginning of some grand, dramatic love story. It was simply the beginning of something real, something that had grown slowly but steadily between them. As the days turned into weeks, Ayanna and Lucas continued to build a life together. They spent their days working side by side, gathering food, tending to the land, and learning from one another. Ayanna helped Lucas understand her tribe's ways, teaching him about the plants, the animals, and the sacred rituals that had always been a part of her life. Lucas, in turn, shared his world with her, telling her stories of his life as a cowboy and the places he had traveled. They learned from each other, growing closer with each passing day. For Ayanna, this was a new chapter in her life. She had never imagined that someone like Lucas, someone from a completely different world, would become so important to her. But love had a way of finding its way into the most unexpected places. And for Lucas, Ayana was no longer just the woman who had healed him. She had become his partner, his equal, and the one he could imagine spending the rest of his life with. In the quiet moments, as they sat together by the fire or walked through the forest, Ayana realized that the love she had once feared was now the very thing that gave her strength. And for Lucas, the wilderness, which had once seemed like a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a home he now shared with the woman he loved. Together, they were no longer just two people from different worlds. They were a new, united force ready to face whatever the future would bring.